Silence swallowed the parking lot. The kind of silence that means something is about to break. Sophie Santos stood outside the Blackwood Hotel's kitchen loading dock, her breath visible in sharp white puffs against the October cold. 7 years old. A pink jacket 2 sizes too small, the zipper broken, held together with a safety pin that dug into her ribs. She had been waiting for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of her small body shaking. 40 minutes of counting the seconds, the way her mother had taught her. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3. The service entrance door burst open. Rowan Santos stumbled through the threshold like something broken trying to reassemble itself. One eye swollen completely shut, the skin around it purple-black, the color of rotting fruit. Handprint bruises wrapped around her throat like an answer to a question no one should ever ask. Blood trickled from her split lip, dripping onto her white waitress uniform, staining the fabric rust-colored. Sophie screamed. Not a word. Just a sound. The sound a child makes when her mother stops being safe. Rowan collapsed to her knees on the concrete, reaching for her daughter with both hands, and Sophie ran to her, her small body colliding with her mother's, and they held each other the way 2 people hold on when they are drowning. Across the parking lot, idling in a black Escalade with tinted windows so dark they looked like the absence of light itself, Aleandro Russo watched. His eyes were storm gray, the color of a sky before hail. He was 42 years old but looked carved from something older than bone. 6'2", shoulders broad as a doorway, wearing a charcoal suit that cost $7,000, the fabric soft as breath. His shirt was open at the collar, showing the hard angle of his collarbone. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin as a whisper, the souvenir of a knife that had missed killing him by half an inch. He watched the mother and child hold each other in the cold. Something ancient woke inside him. Something volcanic. Something that remembered. Vinny sat in the driver's seat, 18 years Aleandro's lieutenant, and he saw his boss's knuckles go white against the leather armrest. Saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Saw something in his eyes shift from cold to something darker, something that looked like vengeance. "Boss," Vinny said carefully, "the way you speak to a man holding a live grenade." Aleandro's voice came out like venom poured into a glass. "Find out everything about her. Her name. Where she lives. Who she works for. And find out who did this. I want a name. I want an address. I want to know everything about the person who marked that woman before sunrise." "Yes, sir." The engine started. The Escalade moved forward, away from the loading dock, away from the light, back into the darkness. But Aleandro's eyes remained fixed on the review mirror, on the image of a child pressing her face against her mother's shoulder, on that small pink jacket fluttering in the wind like a flag of surrender. In that moment, Aleandro Russo made a decision that would destroy 3 people and save 1. What Rowan Santos did not know, as she held her daughter and tried to stop bleeding onto the concrete, was that the most dangerous man in Philadelphia had just decided she belonged to him now. That every resource he had spent 15 years accumulating, every connection earned in blood and money and silence, was about to be aimed at the people who had hurt her. Derek Collins had approximately 30 minutes of freedom remaining. He did not know this yet. He was inside the hotel, counting tips he had stolen from a woman he considered nothing. A woman so desperate she would take his threats without calling the police. A woman so tired she had stopped believing her own suffering was real. But before we continue with what happened next, if this story hits you in a place you didn't expect, please drop a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's video. Every single one of you matters to us. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to the moment Rowan Santos became invisible. 12 hours earlier. 6 in the morning. A studio apartment in northeast Philadelphia where the radiator clanked like something dying inside the walls. Rowan Santos was 31 years old but looked decades older. Her face was thin, the kind of thin that comes from choosing between eating and paying rent. Brown eyes that had once been bright now looked like someone had turned down the light behind them. Her dark hair, pulled back in a braid, showed gray at the temples. She wore yesterday's clothes because she only owned 3 outfits, and laundry cost money she did not have. She sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. On one side of the paper, money coming in. The Blackwood Hotel paid $11 an hour. She worked double shifts 5 days a week. 55 hours. Before taxes, before the tips Derek Collins stole, before the money she gave to her neighbor for watching Sophie and her 5-year-old brother Marcus. On the other side of the paper, money going out. Rent, $1,400. Due on the 1st. It was the 28th. Electricity, $130. Red notice stamped across the bill like a warning. Phone, $49. She needed it for work. Food, $200 if she was careful. If she made the rice stretch. If she let Sophie eat and fed herself the leftovers from Blackwood's kitchen, the cold pasta the night manager let her take. Daycare for Marcus, $520. No daycare meant no job. No job meant no apartment. She added the numbers. Then she added them again because the first answer was impossible. The first answer was always impossible. She had $7 in her pocket. 8 cents. She had counted it 3 times. A noise from the bedroom. Sophie, waking up. Rowan folded the paper and slid it under the salt shaker where Sophie would not see it. She did not want her daughter to know. Not yet. Not at 7 years old. Sophie emerged from the bedroom in yesterday's clothes, her dark hair tangled, her eyes not yet focused on a world that had not been kind to her. She was small for her age. Tiny, really. The kind of small that made strangers ask if she was sick. "Good morning, baby," Rowan said, and her voice sounded normal. It sounded like a mother who was not terrified. "Mama, I'm hungry." 3 words. 3 words that contained every failure of the last 7 years. Rowan's hands moved toward the cabinet, toward the oatmeal, toward the illusion of a normal breakfast. But her mind was still on the paper, on the numbers, on the red notices stamped across the bills like accusations. "I know, sweetheart. We have oatmeal." What Rowan did not know was that in 13 hours, everything would change. That a black Escalade would pull into the parking lot of her workplace. That a man with a scar on his face would watch her daughter search for her in the cold. That her entire life was about to be rewritten by a man who had learned, long ago, what it meant to watch a child suffer. But that was still hours away. For now, there was only oatmeal. For now, there was only the sound of her daughter chewing slowly, stretching each bite to make it last longer, and Rowan pretending not to notice. For now, there was only the count of days until eviction. 3 weeks before the black Escalades arrived, Rowan Santos walked for miles through October darkness to reach Blackwood's hotel. Her sneakers, held together with duct tape wrapped around the sole, slapped against the wet pavement. The sole was coming loose on the left shoe. Every step sent a small shock through her heel. She could not afford new ones. New ones cost money she did not have. The hospital bill was folded inside her jacket pocket, pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She had memorized every number on it. $35,000. Due in 7 days. The word final was stamped across the top in letters so thick and dark they looked like a death sentence. Her daughter Sophie's asthma had sent them to St. Mary's emergency room 3 weeks ago, and now that bill owned her in a way nothing else ever had. The Philadelphia skyline was still black when Rowan pushed through the service entrance of the hotel at 5:53 in the morning. Her breath came in small clouds. The radiator in her apartment had been shut off in September when she missed the payment, so she had gotten used to breathing cold air, used to seeing her breath in her own kitchen, used to waking Michael up in the dark and bundling him in every blanket they owned. 3 jackets on a 4-year-old. That was what $7,000 in medical debt looked like. The kitchen at Blackwood's was already alive. Stainless steel gleaming under fluorescent lights. The smell of coffee and butter and something burning slightly in the back. Head chef Marcus did not look up from the eggs he was scrambling as Rowan clocked in. She moved to her station, her feet already aching, her lower back already tight from yesterday's double shift. Her name tag caught the light as she fastened it. Rowan Santos, it said. The letters were peeling. By 6 o'clock, the breakfast service began. She carried plates and smiled and refilled coffee cups, and her mind was somewhere else entirely. At her apartment, where Michael was still sleeping. At St. Mary's, where they said Sophie needed an inhaler prescription that cost $240 a month. $240 she did not have. At the calendar on her kitchen wall, where she had written eviction in red marker across November 15th. That was 39 days away. Then 41 days gone. Then 38. The morning moved like all mornings moved now. Blur of voices, clink of silverware, the weight of the coffee pot pulling down on her shoulder. A businessman in a charcoal suit waved her over. His eggs were not hot enough. She apologized, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be, and brought him new ones. He did not tip her. A woman at table 7 ordered oatmeal and then sent it back because it was too thick. Rowan brought her new oatmeal, thinner, swimming in milk. The woman pushed $1 across the table without looking at her. At 1:30 in the afternoon, with only 30 minutes left in her breakfast shift, Derek Collins appeared in the service hallway near the supply closet. He was the assistant manager, which meant he had just enough power to hurt people and not enough to get caught. His hair was slicked back with something that made it shine. His coffee breath, when he leaned close, was hot and stale. He had a way of moving through the hotel like he owned it, like every corner belonged to him specifically, like the staff existed only because he allowed them to. He cornered Rowan between the shelves of napkins and plastic cups. "Your tips from table 12, he said. His voice was flat, certain, the way a man sounds when he is stating something that has already been decided. Rowan's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry." 140. On that table with the couple from the suburbs. "Hand it over." "Mr. Collins, I?" She swallowed. "I need that money for Sophie's medication. Her asthma." His palm slammed against the wall beside her head. The sound echoed in the small space. Bottles rattled on a shelf. She flinched, her body moving before her mind caught up, pressing backward into the napkins. He was still close, his shadow falling across her face. "You need this job more," he said. His eyes were small and dark like ball bearings. "Unless you want me to tell Mrs. Blackwood you've been stealing from the register." The lie hung in the air between them. Perfect. Complete. Impossible to untangle because who would they believe? A assistant manager or a waitress with $11 in her pocket. Her hand shook as she pulled the cash from her apron. 140 in tips, mostly wrinkled bills and loose coins, hours of smiling and refilling water glasses. She handed it to him, and he counted it like he was savoring something. Counted it slowly, each bill, letting her watch him do it. His smile was the worst part. The smile said he had done this before. The smile said he would do it again. He walked away without another word, and Rowan stood alone in the supply closet, her breathing loud in her own ears. The rest of her shift passed in a fog. At 2 o'clock, she clocked out and walked to the break room, where she sat for 8 minutes and ate a piece of bread she had taken from the kitchen this morning. Dry. Plain. It filled the hollow space in her stomach enough that she could pretend. Then she changed into her dinner shift uniform, black pants and black shirt, the fabric worn soft from 7 years of washing. The clock said 2:45. Her next shift began at 5. She walked to her car, parked in the employee lot behind the hotel. The 1997 Honda Civic was the color of an old penny, dented on the passenger side from a collision that had happened 3 years ago, before Michael was born, before everything broke. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment and let her forehead rest on the steering wheel. Her eye, the left one, was beginning to swell. Derek had struck her when she moved too slowly, clearing table 9 around 1 o'clock. His knuckles against her cheekbone, fast, practiced, a blow disguised as clumsiness. "She bumped into you," his expression said, completely innocent. The check engine light glowed orange on her dashboard. She turned the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, then turned over. She did not know if it would start tomorrow. She did not know if she would have this car next week or if it would finally give up, like everything else was giving up, like her body was giving up under the weight of staying alive. She drove home through the October afternoon, the broken window seal letting in a wind that cut like a blade wrapped in ice. Philadelphia's streets blurred past her. Gray buildings, gray sky, people walking fast with their heads down. The wind made her swollen eye water. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling in long strips, revealing another layer of wallpaper beneath it, older, more faded. She could hear Michael crying before she even unlocked the door. His grandmother, her mother-in-law Helen, had been watching him since 7 that morning. Helen was 73 and suffered from arthritis and had no business being left alone with a 4-year-old for 10 hours, but Rowan had no other options. No money for daycare. No family nearby. No friends with flexible schedules. Just Helen, who loved Michael fiercely but tired quickly. Helen was sitting in the living room chair, her reading glasses slipped down her nose, the television playing something she was not watching. Michael was on the floor, still in his pajamas, a small figure with her brown eyes and Derek's stubborn chin, crying because he was hungry and tired and his mother had been gone since before dawn. "I am so sorry," Rowan said, and she meant it with a depth that had nothing to do with Helen's 2 hours of overtime watching a 4-year-old. "He has been like this for an hour," Helen said, not unkindly. "I gave him lunch at noon, but it has worn off." Rowan scooped Michael up, and he wrapped his small arms around her neck, his crying giving way to hiccups. She carried him to the kitchen, where she opened the cabinet above the stove. The oatmeal was still there. A box of pasta. A can of beans with no label, something she had salvaged from a dumpster behind the grocery store months ago. She pulled down the oatmeal. As it cooked, she stood at the stove and counted her pocket money on the peeling counter. $11. 4 quarters. 2 dimes. 3 pennies. She had done this 3 times already today. The numbers did not change. Sophie was at school, would not be home for another hour. Sophie was 7 years old, brilliant, careful, the kind of child who understood without being told that money was the problem, that money was always the problem. Sophie had started drawing pictures of things with price tags on them. A new coat with a tag that said $89. New shoes with a tag that said $60. An inhaler with a tag that said $240. Michael ate his oatmeal in the chair beside her, and Rowan watched him stretch each spoonful, making it last, understanding somehow that stretching it made the hunger go away slower. The apartment was cold. The radiator in the corner produced no heat, only the occasional clank of pipes and the sound of other tenants' lives bleeding through the walls. She could hear a couple arguing in the apartment next door. A baby crying in the one above. The ambient sound of poverty, which was the sound of a building slowly giving up. Helen left at 4 o'clock, pressing a $20 bill into Rowan's hand that she absolutely could not afford to accept and absolutely needed. For groceries, Helen said, though they both knew groceries cost far more than $20. At 4:50, Rowan locked the apartment behind her and drove back to Blackwood's. The dinner shift was worse than breakfast because it was longer, because her feet had already carried her miles, because the tips were sometimes better but not always, and when they were not, the disappointment cut deeper. She moved through the evening in her uniform, her swollen eye hidden behind makeup she had applied carefully in the car, her mind nowhere near her body. At midnight, when the last table was cleared and the kitchen was being cleaned and the night manager was counting the register, Rowan walked to the employee parking lot. The October wind was sharp now, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. The sky was the color of a bruise. Her car started on the second try. As she drove through the sleeping city, her hands gripped the steering wheel, and her swollen eye throbbed in time with her heartbeat. The hospital bill was still in her jacket pocket, folded, pressed against her ribs. 7 days until it was due. She did not know where the money would come from. She did not know how she would explain to Sophie that the medication might not happen, that sometimes people just did not get what they needed to survive. What she did not know, as she drove through the October night, was that in exactly 7 days, a black Escalade would pull into the parking lot of Blackwood's hotel. That men in custom suits would step out into the Philadelphia cold. That a man named Aleandro Russo, with a scar running from his eye to his cheekbone and eyes like winter, would learn her name. But that was still days away. For now, there was only the sound of her engine, struggling, questioning whether it would make it home. The Honda Civic made a sound like something breaking inside itself. Metal grinding, a high shriek that pierced through the October wind, then nothing. Rowan's hands gripped the steering wheel as the car coasted toward the shoulder of Lansdowne Highway, momentum carrying her past the moment when she could still believe it was temporary, past the point where turning the key again would matter. She turned it anyway. Once. Twice. 5 times. The engine did not respond. The clock on the dashboard read 11:24 p.m. Outside, the blizzard had transformed Philadelphia into a place that no longer resembled itself. Snow fell so thick that the headlights could only illuminate 15 feet ahead before the white swallowed everything. The temperature had dropped from 43 degrees at sunset to 19, and the wind came howling across the empty highway like something alive and angry, carrying the smell of ice and distance. Rowan sat in the silence of the dead car for exactly 90 seconds before the cold began seeping through the vents. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope with the tips from tonight's shift. 15 $1 bills. 8 singles. She counted them again, though she already knew. $23. Derek Collins had taken the rest, as he always did, his massive hand closing over the bills she had earned by smiling at people who did not tip, by carrying plates and clearing tables and pretending not to hear the comments about her body, her face, the bruise that was still visible despite the makeup. She had $11 at home. This made $34. Against the bill folded in her other pocket, stamped in red letters, final notice. $35,000. 7 days. She stepped out into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a physical thing, stealing her breath immediately. Snow stung her exposed skin, her face, her neck, the small gap between her sleeve and glove, like tiny needles driven by an invisible hand. She turned back toward the direction they had come, hoping for headlights, for another car, for anything. The highway was empty in both directions. Just white and darkness and the sound of the wind moving through the trees like a blade wrapped in ice. Her fingers were numb within 3 minutes. Her toes, though inside shoes and socks, felt like blocks of wood. She stumbled along the shoulder, her waitress shoes, black, worn, the sole separating from the heel, finding no purchase in the deepening snow. A car passed going the opposite direction, its driver too focused on the road to notice her waving. Then nothing again. The fog was not outside. It was inside her mind, creeping in slowly, making her thoughts move like molasses. She understood, in a distant way, what this meant. Hypothermia. She had read something about it online once, searching for signs of heat exhaustion because Sophie had a fever. The body shut down. The confusion that felt almost like peace. She fell into a drift, the snow swallowing her up to her waist. When she tried to pull herself out, her muscles responded slowly, as if receiving messages from very far away. She got up. Took 3 steps. Fell again. Sophie will wake up alone. Michael will not understand why his mother is not there. The thought moved through her mind without feeling. Just a statement. A fact. The darkness at the edges of her vision was not frightening anymore. It was almost merciful. Then headlights cut through the storm. 3 black Escalades, moving together, their emergency lights creating a rhythm in the white, red, white, red, white. The lead vehicle slowed. Through the passenger window, a man's face appeared. Sharp features. Eyes like winter. A scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale against olive skin. Aleandro Russo had not planned to drive back to Philadelphia on this particular night. The meeting in Wilmington had ended at 9 o'clock, and the smart decision was to stay at the hotel, wait for the storm to pass, leave in the morning. But something had pulled at him, a restlessness he did not have a name for. He had told Vinny to drive. Now the city's best driver was leaning forward over the steering wheel, concentrating on the red taillights of the vehicle ahead, when Sal's voice came from the back seat. "Boss, there's something on the shoulder." "A person." Aleandro's head turned. In the beam of the headlights, partially buried in snow, was a dark shape that resolved into a woman's body. "Stop," he said. Vinny did not argue. The Escalade pulled onto the shoulder, tires crunching on the ice. Sal was already moving, stepping out into the blizzard, his expensive coat immediately covered in white. He knelt beside Rowan's crumpled form, his hand reaching for her neck to find the pulse point. "Barely there, boss." "She's got minutes." Aleandro Russo stepped into the October blizzard without hesitation, without calculating risk or benefit or the dozen reasons why a man like him did not stop for strangers. He had seen her before, 3 weeks ago, in the parking lot of Blackwood's hotel, standing beside a dark-haired girl who was holding her mother's hand and waiting. The girl had looked terrified. That image had stayed with him in a way he did not examine too closely. He lifted Rowan himself, her frame so small that she weighed almost nothing, her wet hair freezing into crystals against his coat. Ice clung to her eyelashes. Her lips were the color of slate. "Get her inside." Heat to 95 degrees, slow. No sudden changes. He was already moving toward the Escalade, Sal opening the rear door. Vinny was saying something about jurisdiction, about not knowing her situation, about complications. "I know her daughter," Aleandro said. "That's enough. Drive to the lodge. Now." The convoy turned around before the next car passed. Within 30 seconds, they had vanished back into the white. Rowan's eyes fluttered open once as they drove through the blizzard, her body slowly warming against the heated leather. She saw a scarred face above her, felt the weight of cashmere around her shoulders, and her voice came out as a cracked whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Sophie." Then darkness again. The mountain lodge appeared like something from another world, its stone walls glowing amber against the snow, its windows bright with interior light. Sal carried Rowan inside while Aleandro gave orders that moved through his men like electricity. His phone was already at his ear before the doors closed. "Get me her address. Get me her kids. Get them here. Now." She woke on a leather couch that smelled like expensive furniture and smoke from 1,000 fires. A cashmere blanket, cream-colored, lay across her body. It was the softest thing she had ever felt against her skin. For a moment, suspended between sleep and awareness, she did not remember anything. Then memory crashed back. She jerked upright, her breath coming fast. "My kids. Where are Mama?" Sophie's voice cut through her panic like sunlight through clouds. Both children ran toward her, Michael's small face streaked with tears, Sophie's eyes wide. Rowan pulled them against her, her hands shaking, checking them for injuries, for trauma, for any sign that they had suffered. "Are you hurt? Did they?" "We were scared," Sophie said, her small voice carrying more weight than any accusation. "A man came to the apartment. He said you needed us. He brought us in a big car." Rowan held them closer, her eyes searching the room. The fireplace was massive, built from stones the size of fists, with split oak crackling in the grate. The windows showed only white, the blizzard continuing its assault on the lodge. And standing across the room, partially obscured by shadow, was the scarred man from the car. Aleandro Russo did not move, did not speak. He simply watched them with the intensity of someone witnessing something sacred. "Who are you?" Rowan's voice shook. "Why did you take my children?" "Aleandro Russo." He moved toward them, his footsteps deliberate on the wooden floor. "I own significant portions of this city. The other half wants me dead. I found you dying on Lansdowne Highway. Your daughter was home alone. I made a decision." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. "Why would you help me?" Rowan's voice cracked. "I'm nobody. Aleandro knelt, bringing himself level with Sophie's eyes. The scar that defined his face seemed to deepen in the firelight. 3 weeks ago, I watched a little girl wait in the cold for her mother who came home beaten. I know what that does to a child. I know what it creates inside them. Nobody is going to hurt you again. From the kitchen doorway, Vinny exchanged a look with Sal, the kind of look that acknowledges something shifting in the world. Vinny's voice, when he finally spoke to his driver in the kitchen, was barely a whisper. In 15 years I've never seen him like this. An hour later, when the children were asleep in a bedroom upstairs, Rowan sat at the lodge's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that Aleandro had made himself. The cup was bone china, expensive enough to make her nervous. She wrapped her hands around it for warmth and told him everything. About the hospital bill. $35,000. 7 days. Sophie's asthma had worsened last month, and the specialist at Children's Hospital said she needed a new treatment protocol, new medications, tests that the Medicaid program would not cover without pre-authorization. The hospital had given her until October 26 to pay, or they would send the account to collections. Once that happened, Sophie would be flagged in every medical system in the state. No private doctor would touch her. I have $11 at home, Rowan said, and the words felt like confession. Before tonight I had that. Nothing else. No savings. No family that can help. Derek takes half my tips every night. He says it's a handling fee. He says if I report him, he'll tell every hotel in the city I'm stealing. He's already started. She trailed off. The bruise on her throat was visible now that she had pulled her hair back. The swelling around her eye had started to fade, but the colors, purple deepening to yellow, told the story clearly. Aleandro's expression did not change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Derek Collins did that to you. He said I was disrespecting him. He said I looked at him wrong. She stopped. There were some things her voice could not carry. How long has this been happening? 6 months. Since April. Aleandro stood, his movement precise and controlled, and walked to the window. Outside, the blizzard continued, showing no signs of stopping. Snow piled against the glass like the world was trying to bury everything. I'm going to do something to him, Rowan said. It was not a question. I'm going to do everything to him, Aleandro replied. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they felt like the first true safety she had experienced in years. That evening, she found him in the lodge's study, standing before a single photograph in an ornate frame. A young boy and a small girl, both bruised, both with eyes that had seen too much. The boy was maybe 12. The girl was Sophie's age. My sister Maria, he said, without turning around. She was 7 when our father put her in the hospital. I was 12. I killed him 3 years later. The confession hung between them, heavy and absolute. I clawed my way out of South Philly with my fists. I swore no child would suffer like we did. I built all of this, he gestured, encompassing not just the lodge but everything beyond it, the waterfront properties, the businesses, the power, to have enough power to keep that promise. And I've broken it every day because there are too many Sophies and not enough of me. Rowan stepped closer. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension in the muscle beneath expensive fabric. You saved us. That's not broken. That's exactly what you promised. He turned to face her, and for exactly 4 seconds, his walls were gone. She saw the boy inside him, the one who had held his sister and promised her safety. Then the mask returned, but something had shifted between them. His pain recognized hers. His isolation had found an answer in her presence. The next morning, while Rowan was upstairs with Sophie and Michael, Sal received a phone call. Derek Collins's voice came through aggressive and poison-laced. Rowan Santos didn't show for her shift. She's fired. And I'm telling every hotel from here to Atlantic City that she's a thief. She'll never work in food service again. She'll be unemployable by the end of the week. Aleandro took the phone from Sal's hands. His voice, when he spoke, was soft enough that someone not paying attention might have missed the violence in it. Derek Collins. Remember this voice. Remember that you exist at someone else's mercy now. You have 24 hours to enjoy your freedom. He ended the call. Across the city, in the Blackwood Hotel's executive office, Cordelia Blackwood reviewed security footage with Derek Collins. The recording showed Rowan's locker standing empty, the compartment where she kept her spare apron and name tag cleaned out. "Start the rumors today," Cordelia said. Her voice was ice-wrapped in silk. Rowan Santos was stealing from guests. "I have the fabricated evidence ready. Guest complaints, inventory reports. By tomorrow, she'll be radioactive in this industry." Derek smiled. "She deserves it." Cordelia's eyes held no warmth, no mercy. "She deserves it for being weak. Weak people exist to be used. Forgotten. Replaced." What neither of them understood was that Aleandro Russo's men had already moved. Vinny sat in a borrowed office 3 blocks away, reviewing files. Tax records. Falsified invoices. Stolen guest deposits. Embezzled staff wages. A decade of financial crimes, all traceable directly to Derek Collins and Cordelia Blackwood. His phone buzzed. A text from Sal, watching the lodge's security monitors. "Boss is in the study with the girl. They're just talking." Vinny allowed himself a small smile. In 15 years, he had never seen Aleandro Russo sit with anyone like that, completely still, completely present, as if the rest of the world had stopped mattering. He made another call, his voice steady and professional. "We found everything. Every crime, every stolen dollar, every falsified record. Collins and Blackwood are finished." Outside the lodge, the blizzard finally broke. The clouds separated, and starlight touched the snow, turning it silver. The frozen concrete bit into Rowan's bones as she sat crumpled on the sidewalk outside her apartment building. The October darkness was absolute, the kind of dark that made the world feel smaller, meaner, as if the night itself had teeth. Her cheek throbbed where Derek's hand had connected, the skin split and burning in the pre-dawn cold. She touched it carefully with trembling fingers and felt the sting turn to fire. $11. That's what she had in her pocket. $11 in coins and crumpled bills, and it was supposed to feed Sophie and Marcus for 7 more days. 7 days until she could work another shift if Derek didn't fire her first. If Cordelia didn't make good on the threats that had been dripping from her mouth like poison for weeks. The hospital bill was still in her jacket pocket, folded and refolded so many times the creases had become permanent wrinkles in the paper itself. Final notice. 2 words printed in red ink that felt like a countdown to the end of everything. $47,000 for Sophie's emergency asthma treatment. The inhaler in the apartment upstairs was half empty, rationed, because a full one cost money they didn't have. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible in the darkness. Every muscle screamed. Every bone ached. The past 3 days had been tension stretched so thin it had nearly snapped, and now her body was paying the price. Her mind kept circling back to one thought, repeating like a broken record, give up. Just give up. Walk away. Stop fighting. Stop pretending you can fix this. One tiny thing pulled her back from that edge. Sophie's voice, still vivid in her memory from that first night at the lodge when her daughter had hugged her so tight Rowan could barely breathe. "Mama, you're the bravest person I know." A child's belief. Fragile as paper. Powerful as a blade. Rowan opened her eyes and pushed herself to standing. Her legs shook but they held. She raised her head and saw the street beginning to lighten at the edges, dawn trying to push through the darkness. That was when she heard it, the sound of an engine, heavy and deliberate, pulling up to the curb with the precision of something designed to appear exactly when needed. The black Escalade materialized like a ghost from the shadows. 12 men in black suits emerged in perfect unison, their movements synchronized, each one stepping out with the kind of controlled purpose that made civilians instinctively want to flee. Aleandro Russo stepped out last, and the air itself seemed to change temperature. Derek Collins was still there, standing over the spot where Rowan had fallen, his face twisted with rage and confusion. He'd been waiting, watching to see if she'd crawl back into the building, and now he was staring at the convoy like a man watching his own execution approach in slow motion. "Who the hell are you?" Derek's voice cracked on the last word. Aleandro didn't answer him. His eyes went directly to Rowan, cataloguing every mark on her face, every sign of pain written across her body in bruises and fear. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his chest, something cold and dangerous and final. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. She nodded. Just one small motion of her head. That was all the permission he needed. "Take him," Aleandro said to Vinny and Sal. 2 simple words. A complete sentence of doom. Derek ran. Actually ran, his feet hammering against the concrete as if that meant anything, as if he had anywhere on this earth to go that Aleandro Russo couldn't reach. Sal caught him in 4 steps, his movements economical and final. The impact against the brick wall sounded like a sack of wet concrete hitting pavement. The air left Derek's lungs in a wheeze. "Please," Derek choked out, his voice high and desperate, the kind of desperation that comes when a man finally understands that he is not the predator in this situation. "I didn't know, she's just a waitress, please." Aleandro crouched down until his eyes were level with Derek's, until there was nothing but 6 inches of cold morning air between them. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved from stone. "She is not just anything," Aleandro said. "And you are finished." They dragged Derek to the SUV. His screams echoed off the buildings, off the windows of the apartment where Sophie was still sleeping, where Marcus was probably just waking up wondering where his mother had gone. The sound was the sound of consequence. Of someone finally understanding that the world has limits, and he had crossed them. Rowan watched it all happen as if she were watching from underwater, everything muffled, distant, surreal. Aleandro's hand appeared in her vision, steady and warm, extended toward her. "Come with me," he said. "There's more you need to see." 2 hours later, Rowan sat in Aleandro's car as they drove through Philadelphia toward the Blackwood Hotel. Her cheek was wrapped in gauze, her arm in a sling that Sal's medic had fitted with professional efficiency. The city was waking up around them, traffic building, people moving toward their jobs, their routines, their normal lives. None of them knew that everything was about to change. The FBI arrived at dawn with cameras rolling. Rowan watched from Aleandro's car as agents in blue windbreakers swarmed the hotel lobby. News vans pulled up to the curb. Reporters with perfect hair and plastic smiles started setting up their equipment, preparing their coverage of what was about to unfold. Cordelia Blackwood was arrested at 6:44 a.m. in her penthouse office on the 18th floor. Rowan had watched the footage on Aleandro's phone, played back by one of his men who had contacts inside the police department. Cordelia's perfectly styled hair had come undone. Her designer suit was rumpled. Her nails, always perfectly manicured, always painted the color of blood, were broken and bleeding from where she'd clawed at the agent's arms. "Do you know who I am?" she'd screamed as they pushed her toward the elevator. "I have lawyers. I have connections. Do you understand what you're doing?" The federal agent had answered with the kind of voice that makes empires crumble. "You have 40 years in federal prison, Mrs. Blackwood. That's what you have." The perp walk was broadcast on every news channel by 8 in the morning. Cordelia in handcuffs, her face twisted and ugly with rage, her fortune already being seized by the government, her hotels being shuttered, her name being systematically destroyed in the court of public opinion. By noon, 2 million people had watched the footage. By the end of the day, every outlet in the country had run the story. But what changed everything was what happened to Derek Collins. At midnight, in a warehouse on the Delaware waterfront, Derek Collins was dragged into a room where only 2 people waited for him. Aleandro Russo stood at the window, looking out at the river. Beside him stood Giovanni Moretti, a man whose reputation for cruelty made even other Mafia bosses sleep with one eye open. "He's yours," Aleandro told Moretti simply. He knows things about my operations. Make sure he never shares them. Derek's screams as he was dragged away echoed through the warehouse like the screams of the damned. They echoed for exactly 32 seconds, then stopped. He was never seen again. 3 days later, Rowan stood in Aleandro's study at the mountain lodge, the blizzard now a memory, the roads clear enough to travel. Sophie was asleep upstairs, tucked into a bed that cost more than the car Rowan had been driving when it died on that highway. Marcus was beside her, his small hand wrapped around a pillow. Aleandro entered without knocking. He carried a small wooden box, old and ornate, the kind of thing that had belonged to someone else before him. He set it on the table between them. "I need you to understand something," he said. His voice was different now, not soft, but less armored. "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. And he paused, searching for words that seemed to exist only in languages he no longer spoke. "I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. If you'll let me." He got down on one knee. In 15 years of working for him, Vinny and Sal had never seen Aleandro Russo do anything remotely like this. They stood in the doorway, witnesses to the moment when the most powerful man in 3 states became powerless before a woman who had once been invisible. Inside the wooden box lay a ring that had belonged to his mother, a woman dead 30 years, a woman who had tried to protect him from a father's rage and failed. He was giving it forward now, giving his mother's protection to a woman who had protected her children with the ferocity of someone who had nothing but them to defend. Rowan said yes before he finished asking the question. Outside, the mountain air was cold and clean, and somewhere in Philadelphia, 2 villains were learning the true meaning of consequences. One in federal prison, counting the days of 40 years she would never see the end of. One missing entirely, swallowed by the underworld he'd created, vanished into a darkness he could never escape. But inside the lodge, by the fireplace, Rowan Santos and Aleandro Russo stood together as the sun descended behind the mountains, 2 broken people remade into something whole, something real, something that would last. 2 weeks had passed since Cordelia Blackwood's arrest made national headlines, and the apartment that once smelled like desperation now smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Rowan Santos stood in the doorway of her renovated unit, her hand still trembling slightly as she turned the key in the lock, a lock that actually worked, on a door that closed properly, in a building where the heat ran without begging. The radiators clanked softly, filling the space with warmth that penetrated her bones in a way no amount of blankets ever could. Sophie and Michael sat at the kitchen table, their faces illuminated by the pale afternoon light streaming through windows that no longer rattled in their frames. They were drawing, colored pencils spread across paper, their small hands moving with the ease of children who had stopped flinching at unexpected sounds. Sophie's drawing showed for stick figures, one noticeably taller than the others, all of them holding hands. She had drawn him with a scar running down one cheek and labeled it in careful block letters, Mr. Russo. Rowan's eyes caught on that drawing, and something shifted in her chest, not pain, but recognition. The fear that had lived in her shoulders for 18 months was gone. The constant calculation of survival was gone. The taste of panic that she had learned to swallow with every breath was gone. Her new job paid $22 an hour plus tips, tips that belonged to her, every single cent. Aleandro owned the restaurant, a upscale Italian place on Walnut Street where the clientele wore expensive watches and spoke in careful, measured tones. He had given Rowan the title of general manager and the authority to hire her own staff, to train them with patience instead of absorbing their cruelty. 3 days in, a server had made a crude remark about her appearance. She had fired him by lunch. The old Rowan would have accepted it, rationalized it, convinced herself she deserved it. This Rowan had simply said no. The hospital bill lay on the counter, stamped paid in full across the front in bold letters. $47,312. It had been real. It had been crushing. It had nearly destroyed her. And now it was a piece of paper she could throw away without her hands shaking. Sophie's asthma specialist was booked for the next 5 years. Not contingent. Not dependent on her ability to scrape together co-pays. Scheduled. Secured. Real. The sound of an engine broke through her thoughts, not the sharp, aggressive sound of a police siren or an eviction notice being served, but the smooth purr of a black SUV pulling up to the curb outside. Rowan's body remembered old fear for half a second before her mind caught up. It was Aleandro. He was coming to drive them to the mountain lodge for the weekend, just as he had promised. She watched from the window as he emerged from the vehicle, 6'1" of deliberate movement and tailored cashmere, the same man who had found her bleeding on a highway and made the impossible choice to save her. Vinny and Sal stayed in the car, giving them space, a courtesy that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. The men in Aleandro's world protected his privacy now, understood that this woman and these children were not business, not transactions, not complications. They were the reason he breathed. Sophie heard the knock and ran to the door before Rowan could reach it, yanking it open with the unself-consciousness of a child who no longer expected violence. Mr. Russo stood in the hallway in his dark coat, snow melting in his dark hair, and Sophie looked up at him with complete trust. "Is your mother ready?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of controlled power, but his eyes were only for the child. "She's always ready now," Sophie said. "She doesn't cry as much anymore." The words landed differently than the child intended. Sophie meant it as simple fact: her mother was recovering, healing, moving forward. But Aleandro heard in it the measure of Rowan's suffering, the depth of the wound that was now being mended, and something flickered across his face, a flash of the violence he carried, briefly visible, then controlled again. Michael appeared with his backpack, then Rowan, carrying Sophie's medication and a small duffel with their weekend clothes. She had learned not to overpack. There was no need to carry everything she owned everywhere anymore. She could leave things in one place and return to them. The luxury of that simple security still astonished her. "Hello," Aleandro said, his eyes meeting hers, and the world narrowed to just the two of them for a fraction of a second. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He had never been a man prone to smiling, and 5 weeks of knowing Rowan Santos hadn't made him a different man. But the way his shoulders relaxed when she stepped toward him, the way his hand reached out to steady her on the icy stairs, that was new. That was Rowan. The drive to the mountain lodge took 2 hours, the children eventually surrendering to sleep as the city gave way to forests, as highways narrowed to winding roads, as the grip of Philadelphia released them into something wild and quiet. Rowan sat in the front seat beside Aleandro, her hand resting on the seat between them. He reached over without looking at the road and covered it with his own. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking about Derek," she said. "About what you said." "That he's gone." Aleandro's jaw tightened slightly. He had never given her details, and she had never asked. That was the boundary they had silently established. She would not ask about the mechanics of his justice, and he would not insist on explaining them. Some things were better left in darkness. "He is gone," Aleandro confirmed. His voice was steady, certain. "He will never hurt anyone again." Rowan should have been horrified. The old Rowan would have been. The woman who had read every legal brief about due process and fair trials would have recoiled from the implication. But the Rowan who had watched her daughter cower in their apartment while Derek's bruises bloomed across her own skin, that Rowan was simply relieved. That Rowan understood that some people could not be stopped by the law because the law had already failed. That Rowan was grateful in a way that felt like guilt but also felt like freedom. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me for that." His voice was rough. "Thank me for everything else. But not for that." When they arrived at the lodge, the fireplace was already crackling with heat, a fire built by hands Rowan would never see and maintained by an infrastructure of care that moved silently around her. The children ran upstairs to the bedroom they had claimed as theirs, and Rowan and Aleandro stood before the fire as the evening settled around them. "I don't know how to be anything but what I am," he said suddenly, not looking at her, but addressing the flames. "I'm not asking you to be different," Rowan replied. "I'm asking you to be here." He turned to her then, and there was something raw in his expression, not softness, because Aleandro Russo would never be soft, but vulnerability. A man who had built an empire on violence, undone by the simple kindness of a woman who asked nothing of him except presence. When he kissed her, it was gentle and certain, and for the first time in his violent life, Aleandro felt something that resembled peace. Upstairs, Sophie slept with Michael's hand in hers, both of them finally believing in tomorrow. 6 months later, the mountain lodge glowed with Christmas lights strung across the mantel, and Sophie and Michael decorated a tree that reached toward the vaulted ceiling, their laughter pure and untethered by fear. Rowan stood in the kitchen of the restaurant that bore Aleandro's name but carried her imprint, the warmth of her training, the kindness of her management, the integrity of her leadership, and thought about the woman she had been. That woman had counted every penny. That woman had walked through the world invisible. That woman had believed her suffering was destiny. This woman knew better. Aleandro watched her through the restaurant window during her shift, Vinny beside him, both of them still and quiet. "She's good for you, boss," Vinny observed. "She's good, period," Aleandro replied. "I'm just trying to be worthy of it." And that had become his new mission, not the acquisition of power, but the cultivation of being worthy of the love of someone who had chosen him despite everything she knew about him, because of everything she had come to understand about him. That a man forged in violence could still choose gentleness. That a man built for war could still choose peace. That darkness cannot drive out darkness, only love can do that. When Rowan and Aleandro stood together before that fireplace 6 months later, his arm around her waist, watching the children decorate the tree, watching them laugh without fear, watching them simply be children, Rowan spoke the words that had become the truth of their story. "Darkness cannot drive out darkness," she whispered. "Only love can do that." Aleandro pulled her closer, this woman who saved him by letting him save her, and whispered back, "Then we're both in the light." Outside, snow fell gently, and the warm glow of the lodge became a beacon against the winter dark. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to believe that broken people can be made whole. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the moment everything changes. Comment below, have you ever been saved by an unexpected kindness? Let's talk. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. See you tomorrow.